the Israel test is how Israel's genius enriches and challenges the world. And the first Israeli genius I met, I believe, was Jonathan Medved's father, and who was David Medved, an amazing innovator in free space optics and fiber optics and all kinds of photoelectronic innovations. And I write about him in the chapter of the Israel test called Hidden Light. And thus I got introduced to the Medved family. And of course, Michael is a titan of interviewer in his programs, and Jonathan is perhaps in some ways the most innovative venture capitalist in the world. He's mobilized unaccredited investors, ordinary investors, and channeled them into the genius of Israel. All the private companies of Israel, thousands of them, are accessed by ordinary investors through OurCrowd. And OurCrowd even reaches to the United States, because my newsletters and my subscribers also get to invest through my crowd, and OurCrowd, excuse me. And but what Jonathan really wants me to tell you about is he has 15 grandchildren and 3 sons and a son-in-law in the IDF, Israel Defense Forces. And so his presence here is really a blessing, and he made an amazing effort. And welcome, Jonathan Medved.
Thank you, and good evening. You'll excuse my voice. It's usually deeper and more robust, but I will hopefully grow into this. I've been losing it the last couple of days. I want to thank George for the comment about my late father, Dr. David Medved. He was an inspiration to all of us, and he would have really enjoyed today's conversation. I thought the conversation in today's conference was scintillating, to use an electro-optic term, and was extraordinary, because how many places can you go in the world and have a absolutely top-notch technology discussion with a heart and a spirit and a sense of morality and purpose? And I thought that this was, I didn't expect anything else, but it was, you delivered today. Just a quick explanation. As George said, OurCrowd today is Israel's largest venture capital investor. We're managing close to $2.5 billion of capital, but we do it differently. We democratize access to the venture capital asset class. We have actually got about 250,000 worldwide investors from 195 different countries. We are seeking Togo. If anybody knows an accredited investor in Togo, let me know afterwards, please. I think we're short like 4 countries. But we have investors from everywhere. They can invest $10,000 on up in a very carefully curated array of startups in every sector of innovation and every stage of gestation. So some of these companies are just seed companies. Some of them are later stage. We've had close to 70 exits. We also manage funds at the moment, about 60 different funds. So it's quite an operation, but we're actually moving global. So entrepreneurs here, and I heard many of them, I was feverishly writing down notes. We're hunting deals in the States. We're investors in Anthropic, Grok, and others, and looking for interesting deals here, so please be in touch. It's a good thing what we've done, because when you look at what's going on in the private markets, they've just gone boom. And they will continue to grow at an enormous rate, meaning that everybody understands how you invest in a stock. Right? You pick up your phone, if you're an old guy, you go online, or go on your app if you're a younger person. But it's not a biggie, right? In other words, you want to go to Robinhood, the barriers are not significant. But let's say that you come to the Gilder conference and you hear this incredible presentation. You hear verses, okay? You say, wait a minute, I believe that hype curve. I saw where he is. I want to buy there if you believe that pitch. How do you do it? Well, it's not easy. And so that's the problem that we solve at OurCrowd. And the fact that this private market thing is going completely crazy has been very lucky for us. And it's also important because startups take longer. And this is a weird thing, given the speed of acceleration of technology adoption, right? We're incredibly proud of how quick, for example, OpenAI has gotten to that 300 million monthly number, what a number, of revenue, and projecting $11.6 billion next year. This is incredible, except you know how long it takes the average company to get public? 15 years now. Back in the day, it was 6 years, 7 years. Back when Bob was innovating Metcalfe's law, how long did it take 3Com to get public? 5 years. Yeah, it was between 5 and 7 years. Now it's 15 years, so you must have access to these private companies or you're missing out on a lot of growth. So that's the advertisement for what I do. I'm happy to talk to people afterwards, but I want to talk about Israel. And I want to talk about, obviously, our tech economy and what's going on, but in the context of the war that we're fighting. Because the day after the war, I went on TV. I don't remember, it was Bloomberg or CNBC. And I was asked, okay, what does this mean for the Israeli tech economy? What's going to happen? And I made a very simple, easy projection, which I said, well, the shekel is going to be hit, the currency is going to go down, and our stock market's going to go down. And then I made a less easy projection, which is that it's going to rebound immediately. It will take a couple of weeks, let's say, but it will not just rebound, it will overshoot. And I remember the interviewers were sort of incredulous, because I did this a couple of times. And the only really stupid thing I did is I didn't buy my own advice. So you look here, and you can see the data on the shekel. The shekel's been rock solid. It stays at 0.27 to the dollar. You'll see that dip. And you can see almost the exact same phenomena relative to the Tel Aviv 35, except that the actual current price of the I haven't updated this. Tel Aviv 35 is now at 2,200. So it's way up. It's up about 30%, for the year in Israel, despite the war. So there are challenges, though. And Israel, in particular, is facing issues with its construction and agriculture industries because we can't get foreign labor. We're very dependent, have been, on a lot of Palestinian labor as well as labor from Thailand and Romania and all kinds of places. And it's been hard given the situation to get the foreign labor. So these sectors, although quite minimal in terms of Israel's overall economic scene, have been hurt. And the most difficult part is travel and tourism. Because I don't know how many of you traveled to Israel or tried to travel to Israel. Right now, there have been a whole, just boatloads or plane loads of cancellation of flight service. So I luckily flew here via El Al, which is Israel's national carrier. But, there is not a lot of options. So it turns out that today's news, actually today, is the Israeli tech companies have now organized and are setting up a new tech airline, at least in the interim, to make sure that their customers and whatnot can get back and forth to Israel, which we'll see how that works out. The tech sector in Israel is the economy. And if you can look at this slide here, you'll see that the way that oil and gas is Russia, the way that oil and gas is Saudi Arabia, well, that's the way that tech is to Israel. And it turns out that it's responsible for over 50% of Israel's total exports and 20% of Israel's GDP, which is an extraordinary number. Where you can look at people like South Korea, the numbers are 34 and 13, okay, in terms of exports and GDP, or even the U.S. The percentages are very strong in the U.S., but Israel has an extraordinary correlation to technology. Now, what's interesting, but maybe seems in line with the story I told you about the stock market and the currency, is that this year of war, it turns out that the investment dollars in private companies in the venture capital sector in Israel is way up. And this was surprising, because I think people have the natural reaction that, look, if you're a private investor, let's face it, you're doing a risky thing, right? Most private companies fail. We call it venture capital. In English, it sounds like a trip to Disneyland on one of those e-ticket rides back, if you remember those days. Okay, but in Hebrew, the word for venture capital is hon sikun, which means danger capital. We're sort of direct. We don't have a lot of tact in my country. The reality is that, venture capital is not for the faint of heart. But therefore, you would think that when there are missiles flying, and not just a few, and not just small ones, but there are really missiles, God forbid, flying, and there's this situation, investors will say, give me a break. I'll be back. I'm sure you'll take care of it. Call me when it's done. No. It's absolutely wild. And if you look at what's happened in the first half when this data was released, you compare the first half of 24 to the first half of 23, and it was up in Israel by 32%. They now have data. Yeah, thank you. That deserves an applause. They now have data for the third quarter. Today's the end of the third quarter. And that data shows a continuing trend of 30% year-on-year increase in venture capital funding. But what's interesting is that, and you can see this in the numbers, ignore the 21 outlier, right, which was this incredible COVID bubble. But what's interesting is that this actually means, and this is bizarre, that Israel is leading the world in the venture capital recovery. It turns out that amen to that. Venture capital has not been doing so great. It's been sort of bouncy since the COVID period. There are bright spots such as AI, but it turns out that the U.S. was up 30% in the first half and 28% in the first three quarters. And Israel was up 31 and 28. So the U.S. and Israel are lockstep in terms of leading a venture capital recovery, whereas Asia is down 18% and Europe is down about 8%. Now, there have been negative news on the ratings industry. Okay, in other words, the ratings agencies, the Moody's, S&P, Fitch, they are unable to ignore the macro signs of war. And they've downgraded for the first time Israel's very, very high rated debt. Now, the good news is Israel's debt to GDP ratio is one of the lowest in the world. It's like 60%, which is, yes, half of the US. And Israel's foreign reserves are at an all-time new high. So Israel, from a fiscal standpoint, is just all right. Now, you can see what I mentioned before in terms of the global numbers, that you'll look at the 2021, 22 numbers. They were outliers as a result of COVID. They've come down and are just starting to tag up, and you'll see that go up certainly in the next time I update these slides with the third quarter of 24. Now, here's something, again, a little bit of a shameless ad. This was just published 2 days ago by Startup Nation Central, which does a great job of tracking Israel's ecosystem. And again, they're estimating $10 billion of deals, 10 billion that is, by the way, which is a huge number for a country like Israel with 10 million people, being invested in Israel's ventures sector so far the first 3 quarters. And when they say the leading investors, OurCrowd continues to be the leading investor in Israel with 65 investments. That's 65 different rounds that we participated in so far this year. Now, you might ask yourself, why? Why is this happening? But before we answer that or try to answer it, I want to ask 2 other questions. Why this? Ilya Sutskever. We were hearing from Andrew about his time at OpenAI. Ilya is a world figure, very interesting guy, former chief scientist, co-founder of OpenAI. And he decides to go on gig number 2, I guess, or maybe it's more than that, but it's his next gig. And it's a company called Safe Superintelligence. And he's partnered with a brilliant guy who, full disclosure, grew up in my house pretty much, a guy named Daniel Gross, who literally, I think the first job, probably illegal, was testing one of my companies called Vringo. But him and Daniel built this startup called Safe Superintelligence. And I really think this is a world record-setting company. 10 employees. Valuation, $5 billion. How does that sound? That's pretty amazing. But what's more exciting to me is it's got 2 locations. One, of course, Palo Alto, and the other, Tel Aviv. So that's sort of the story, I think, of much of what's going on in tech today. Now, the other question I wanted to bring up, that's the second question, why that? And the third paradox is this one, and this is in honor of the discussion last night with Bob and George about Ethernet and NVIDIA. Turns out they announced this week that the well-named Colossus, which is the world's largest AI supercomputer being built for the new Elon Musk AI juggernaut, is now going to be the world's largest and in terms of its throughput, and it's all being built on Ethernet technology that was acquired in the NVIDIA acquisition that George so appropriately mentioned last night of Mellanox in Israel. So these 3 things. Why is this happening? Well, I'm going to try to give you 5 quick answers. My brother, when he writes books, writes about the 10 rules, the 10 things. I think 10 is too much for a speech. 5 will have to do it tonight. And there are really 5 reasons why this is happening, and we'll go through them pretty quickly. Number 1 is what's called mega rounds. It turns out that in Israel, as in America, about half of the money being invested in venture capital is now in rounds that are $100 million or more for a single round. So I'm investing in George's startup. I'm giving him $100 million or in the case of Ilya Sutskever and Daniel Gross, $1 billion. But it's still a mega round. And the fact that these are happening is a good thing, because the capital needed for the AI companies is significant. You can't do it on a shoestring. This is important. The fact that Israel has got these mega rounds has been very, very important for it. And in particular, Wiz, which you might have seen is a 3-year-old company, just raised $1 billion at a $12 billion valuation. This company also has hundreds of millions of revenue, and what I thought in either an act of, call it hubris or courage or a mixture of both, walked away from a $23 billion Google acquisition offer, which came literally 45 days right after the funding of the $12 billion round, and resulted in just a few tears on Sand Hill Road. Because if you do 45 days and a 2x, that's a pretty damn good IRR on some money. And you can see here an example of these mega rounds, what they mean for Israel. Lots of great, great companies. We don't have time to go over them. We had our own big mega round, a company called BioCatch, which comes out of Israel's very, very once secretive, now talked about too much unit called 8200. It's shocking, actually. It used to be that, Israelis, I see my friend Gilad's here, Israelis never spoke about 8200 because it was secret. It's the Israeli NSA. Except now, I don't think there's a day that the New York Times is not writing something about what's going on in 8200. So this unit actually has an innovation unit in the unit. And so the innovation unit of 8200, the guy who ran it, came up with this idea where you can identify somebody, and you will understand the importance of this, by how they touch their phone. Meaning, forget eyeballs, forget voice prints, forget fingerprints, behavioral biometrics, meaning how you touch the screen, how you carry it, how quickly you type, where you put it relative to your gait. All of this is measured. And literally every one of us has a distinct signature. Now, this is important for banking, and hence this company, which they founded, called BioCatch, is now a darling. It was acquired by a consortium of private equity leaders, including Permira and Macquarie Bank and Sapphire, and we are very happy. And we actually took a partial exit, but are continuing to invest with them as they build the company. We got in as a seed investor. But it's interesting stuff when you realize what we can do with a cell phone or a beeper these days. But in any event, the second reason that this story of Israel is happening at the moment is the foreign participation in these rounds. And it turns out that Israel's capital that's being invested is not just domestic capital like OurCrowd or Israeli investors. In fact, during this period of time, this year, 93% of the funding rounds had a foreign investor, which set an all-time record. So it turns out that the foreigners who know Israel are coming nonetheless and continuing to invest. People like Excel and Sequoia, Greylock reopened offices. Index has made 6 new investments in Israel. And that's a big part. The third reason is, by the way, before I get to the third reason, this is another just interesting piece of news. During the war, we opened up a Korea-Israel fund where the government of Korea decided to invest in Israel, not with a lot of fanfare. They didn't want the publicity out there too much, but the bottom line is we're busy now hunting interesting combinations of Israeli Korean companies. The third reason is cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is the gift which keeps on giving to Israel. It turns out that about 50% of the funding this year so far has been in cyber companies. And the dominance of Israel in cyber is pretty amazing. One second. I wanted to go back. Oops. Hit the wrong number. Of the last 14 M&A transactions, merger and acquisition transactions, that were done in the cyber area, how many of the 14 were done with an Israeli company? 13, which means pretty much you're either investing in Israeli cyber or you're not getting, the kind of exits which you deserve. And so that's been a big part of this. Item 4 is AI. And if you look at AI, today it represents 35% of all venture funding on a global level. That's incredible. I don't think there's ever been something, I guess the internet back in the day, networking might have got close to those kinds of numbers. But that's pretty remarkable. And that's been a very good thing for Israel because Israel is right up there in terms of AI. We have a lot of companies. I'm not going to talk about our companies at the moment. And the final item, which really gives this, if you look at the fact that there are mega rounds, that there's foreign participation, that there is cybersecurity, there's AI, and then there's now something new, maybe not new, but it's new for the venture world, which is defense tech. Since when have venture capitalists been interested in defense? I know you guys are from Texas, where some of you are. But up here in the state of Boeing, you also have a healthy defense industry. But that has not been the most, popular venture capital investment. If you ran through Silicon Valley on Sand Hill Road and were waving a business plan saying, I got this new hot defense startup, you didn't get much love. That's totally changed. Turns out that defense tech has now become quite sexy. And don't take my word for it, listen to KPMG. And this is obviously having another impact on Israel because we're really one of the top suppliers of defense. We are, by the way, investors in a project I'm sure you've heard of called the Iron Dome. We're the largest shareholder together with the government of Israel through Rafael in the company that makes the software for the Iron Dome. And now is coming Iron Beam. And they're promising us that Iron Beam, which is the laser version here, will be fielded within the year. And it's a complete game changer because the problem with the Iron Dome, and especially the longer range Hetz or Arrow missile system, is the cost of the interceptors. The Hetz missile, which takes out these huge, I don't know if you've seen the size of these missiles that the Iranians have been throwing at us. They're big. But the Hetz costs about $1 million per interceptor, some of them even more expensive. And Iron Dome, which can handle a much larger variety of missiles, usually shorter range, not ballistic, they are handling $50,000 a shot. What's the cost of an Iron Beam shot? Yeah, it's a couple of bucks. It literally a couple of bucks. So this appeals to anybody, but in my country, this is a big thing. And we are very excited about the Iron Beam coming online and it will save lives. One of the cool things is these companies that are emerging now that are combining all these things together. So we have a company called Cyabra, which is an AI company, cybersecurity, because it's essentially focusing on fake news, how to combat fake news from hurting elections, sort of an important topic here, and everywhere else. And it's like defense, cybersecurity, and AI all wrapped up. Mike Pompeo just joined the board of this company, and they've made an announcement to do an early IPO because they want to give investors in the public market a chance to get involved, which is interesting. So, look, I'm going to just make a few more comments, and then we'll go to the panel, because I think that you probably would prefer more interactive stuff. But I want to say a few words about the personal side of living in Israel and what it means, and a little bit about the nature of the country. When you think of Israeli soldiers, and especially you're reading about the real achievements of the last several days and weeks, it doesn't look like this, does it? These look like a Jewish men's club from your local synagogue. Okay, this doesn't look like Rangers or Green Berets or Naval SEALs. But remember, Israel's defense forces is the army of the nation of Israel. It's got everybody. It's got a bunch of A-listers and really incredible top elite people, but it's got everybody. This turns out to be my sales force. These 4 guys work for me, and they have each spent over 200 days in reserve duty over the past year and change. Imagine what that's like. It's what people don't fully understand is the size. They are, if they're fighting in Gaza, in most cases, they are fighting less than an hour from home. An hour from home. If they're fighting up in Lebanon, so it's a couple hours, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, in most cases. We're fighting at our doorsteps. We have no strategic depth. We have missiles being fired at us, and we can shoot them down. We have people who come over our borders, and we can defend them. But it's ultimately up to that synagogue men's club to save our lives. And it's up to our kids to be there on the front lines. My son-in-law, who some of you might know, he's part of a singing duo with my daughter. They call themselves Yonina, Y-O-N-I-N-A. If you go look it up, you can see some good music. They do a lot of performing, except his job in the Army, he's a commander of an infantry unit. I won't tell you where, but somewhere in action. And he's also done over 200 days, Yoni. And my daughter, Nina, they have 4 kids under the age of 8. And it's not easy running a household with 4 little kids and your husband, in harm's way. But to give you just a sense of how weird it gets, he sends a WhatsApp on the family WhatsApp chat a week ago saying we just had an incident with some terrorists who attacked us. We're fine. In case you hear, they're not. And within 24 hours, he was on a scheduled trip to Holland to do 3 days of concerts, back to Israel, back to his unit. That's what's going on in the country. And unless you get that, you really can't even begin to understand what it's like to live in Israel. We're very proud. We are very blessed to live in a country which is so committed to the future. I want to leave you with 2 other things before I get to just one slide, which is the most important slide I've got. You know what? I'm sorry, I've got to talk about this. I can't leave this out. I'm sorry. I keep on doing this. I go back and miss the back slide. All right, now I can go. The difficulty we have in college campuses or in some parts of the world is not lost upon us. And it doesn't make it easy to be an Israeli. I'm absolutely delighted that there's no heckling here. Not that I ever dreamed that there would be, but I have friends who are going to speak and present academic papers. And if they're lucky to be invited, they get canceled. There's heckling. It's just incredible. The problem is that you might get the impression that the entire Arab and Islamic world is part of this process. And it's not true. It turns out that, in my opinion, sorry. Oops, gosh. I'm gonna, okay. That I think Joe Biden was right when he said, right after the war broke out, that part of this timing of Hamas attacking us was designed to disrupt the coming normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. I myself have been 3 times a guest in the kingdom, and I can tell you how serious the discussions and the interests are between a very big part of the Arab world in getting this conflict behind us, in finding a way forward, which doesn't include terrorists who want our destruction, who doesn't include, more warfare or bloodshed that goes on for hundreds of years, that it's over, that we're going to turn the Middle East into a garden again, that we're going to use our combined entrepreneurial energies to create new companies and new exciting solutions to global problems. I mean, what an inspiring story of the children of Abraham getting together, and putting this together. The Abraham Accords are a huge thing, in my opinion, of great, great hope for the world, and a proper beacon. And so far so good. The trade's been going up. We're doing a lot in the UAE, and it's really quite amazing. We opened up a subsidiary in Abu Dhabi, and we operate a AI startup, would you believe, who has used AI to pick startup winners, because we are dealing with a situation in the startup world where the information is opaque. We don't have a Bloomberg for startups. So you need AI. Okay, and first you need the AI to get the information out, and then you need the AI to deal with it. So we're doing this, believe it or not, with the Abu Dhabi Investment Office. Anybody wants to talk to me about backing this, I'd be delighted to. It's called Integrated Data Intelligence. I can arrange demos. In fact, what I'd love to do, George, is get a demo of this out to your newsletter as sort of a spiff for your people. I think they would find it fun to play with that. So, and last but not least, speaking of George's people, too many slides. So, turns out that we have a partnership with George and your private reserve, if I'm not mistaken, whereby people who are involved with George get a chance to invest in a select group of companies that George and his team have approved of. One of them is our Artificial Intelligence Fund, which is very exciting, and we can talk about that later. I don't really have too much time to get into that. The other is a company called Halo, which is making AI accelerated chips for the edge. At the moment is a leader in this edge processor, very low cost, low power, high performance chips. And they also invested in a company called Bionaut, which, if I can date myself, you might have remembered that movie, Fantastic Voyage, with Raquel Welch. I remembered more Raquel Welch than anything else, but in any event, there's about this little tiny voyage through the body. I don't know if you can see that dot next to the finger. That is the robot that delivers drugs and does all kinds of things, which Gilder Private Reserve people have invested in. And then there's One AI, which is a nice Asian company. And soon you'll be hearing, I hope, about this cooling company doing a non-water liquid cooler for data centers called ZutaCore, which is really amazing. So ultimately, what I want to leave you with is the sense that above and beyond everything, the relationship between the U.S. and Israel is strategic. We couldn't do a thing without our friendship with the U.S. And I think that we are also important to the U.S., to U.S. technology, to U.S. values. And I can tell you that every Israeli appreciates this as a bedrock of our existence. And one of the things I'm hoping for is that the reality today where there is still bipartisan, strong bipartisan support for Israel. It is not one side or the other only liking Israel, okay? That there are friends on both sides. That's critical to Israel's future. And I'm hoping that whatever happens in the election, that will continue after next Tuesday. So thank you for listening, and really appreciate, George, the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
I'm Bruce Chapman, and I have known George Gilder for, most of my life, almost 65 years. And I had the great privilege of going on a trip with his wife and my wife, and we went to Istanbul for a discovery conference in 2007. And at that conference, George made it clear that he wanted to go to Israel and check it out, check some of the interesting things he was hearing about businesses in Israel. And I said, I'm going to come with you. And after a couple of days, I think I spent them sightseeing. He went around looking into these businesses. He said, I think, Bruce, I want to write a book about Israel. And not just the businesses, the tech enterprises that I'm uncovering and finding out about, but about the culture and how this is happening, how it's gotten turned around, the policies that have changed to make Israel so prosperous suddenly after many years as a socialist country, which made it very popular with the American left. When it became prosperous and had more of a free enterprise aspect to it, it became less popular with the American left, as you were hearing. You saw the slides about the American campuses. So George said, you probably are not going to see this as a discovery project. I said, oh yes, we will. And the result was the Israel test. Now the Israel test has been through a revision. It came out in 2009, and then it was sold again as a revision with Joe Lieberman doing an introduction. And now it's out in a new revision, just at a very appropriate time. And copies of this book will be available tomorrow, and George has graciously said he'll sign them if you would like to buy one. And that would be great, because we have a lot of them. I'd like to get them off our hands. But seriously, I also would like to get them into our campuses around the country. We have been trying to get ads for the Israel test in various newspapers that have campus newspapers where there have been riots on the campus by far left-wing groups. And you'd be interested to know that a lot of these college campus newspapers do not want the ad. And I'll tell you more about it later, maybe, but some of them have turned us down on the grounds that they're not partisan. Well, the ad is not partisan. Israel is not partisan. We're a nonprofit. We're nonpartisan. There's nothing partisan about it. But there is clearly an ideological issue at stake. So I want to urge you to take a look at the book for a lot of reasons. One of them is that the new introduction that George wrote has so much about defense, and it is so exciting. And one of the conclusions that George makes is that we need Israel. Israel needs us, but we turn out to need Israel. And there are many examples of that. I want to say one other thing before I call the other panelists up, and that is that I've been to Israel a number of times, but one of the most meaningful visits to that part of the world was when I was a U.S. ambassador to the UN organizations in Vienna at the end of the Reagan years, the last 3 years of the Reagan administration. And one of the UN organizations to which I was accredited was UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee Works Administration, which runs some of the food programs and the schools, very importantly, and some of the medical things and facilities in Gaza, the West Bank, which is Judea and Samaria, and in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan. Now today they have 30,000 employees, or at least they did at the beginning of this recent war. Whereas the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has 19,000 employees and about 10 times as many people that it's serving as UNRWA does. And I want to say that I have a great heart, a great sense of concern for the Palestinian people, because I think the peace that Jonathan was talking about can come about, but there does need to be a change in the people. And there's lots to be said about that. We went through World War II, where we had denazification of Germany. It took several years to turn Japan around, but it all happened. They're democratic, and the culture has actually changed. Well, this is a deeply embedded, hostile culture. I saw when I was going through these cities, they're not really camps, in the Middle East. I saw these UNRWA schools where kids are being taught. This was 35 years ago, before Hamas, before Hezbollah, but they were being taught how wicked the Jews are, and particularly the Israelis and the Americans. You see a figure of Uncle Sam smoking a cigar made of dollar bills. Big plutocratic Uncle Sam. They didn't like the free enterprise system either. So now you have one of the most dynamic free economies and productive in the world, sitting right next to one of the worst welfare state cases that it could possibly happen. And guess who's helping fund both sides? You, the American taxpayers. Over $1 billion in the last 3 years has gone into UNRWA. And it's turned out that hundreds, probably somewhere short of 500 of their employees are terrorists, active terrorists. Some of them have been killed lately. So one of the questions I hope we'll get to is, how can we replace UNRWA? I think it can't be reformed, it has to be replaced. And can there be a Palestinian OurCrowd? Can we do things with Palestinians someday? How will that happen, or can it possibly happen? With that, I want to have George come forward, and George is going to probably run most of this panel. And Jim Tour, where are you, Jim? And you all know Jim. I think he's a famous nanotechnologist, pioneer, a professor of chemistry at material science and nanoengineering at Rice University in Houston. He is the leading graphene researcher in the U.S. and was named to the National Academy of Engineering early this year. I think the man is probably a future Nobel Prize winner, but maybe we'll get to that. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think some of his inventions are incredible, and we're going to hear a little bit about that. So, and then next, Gilad Jaron is the co-founder and CEO of the Israeli company ASOX, which develops on-premise cloud solutions, and he's been a collaborator, and they have been a collaborator with mobile network carriers to support the move to 5G in a number of places. With 25 years of experience, he brings extensive expertise to telecommunications and to mobile communications. So with that, I'd like to sit down. And does everybody here have a, okay, good, we're mic'd up. And I'd like to start with that question, Jonathan. Do you have a reaction to what hope is there for?
I think there is great hope, and I'll have to tell you a story which I think is indicative of the dynamic of what's going on. We've been talking a lot about this company Mellanox, which was bought by NVIDIA with the InfiniBand and Ethernet technology, which was really used to power the ultimate ascendancy of NVIDIA. Turns out the founder of Mellanox is a guy named Eyal Waldman, who is an amazing person. He not only built the company that did this and sold it for $7 billion, which sounds like a steal, to NVIDIA. Yeah. Although he took a lot of stock, so I think he's happy too. But he is also what we call a mensch, a gentleman, an incredible good guy who has become, over the last 2 decades, Israel's largest employer of Palestinian programmers. Turns out that Mellanox, which NVIDIA has now continued, has a very big program in Ramallah where they're employing Palestinian programmers. And they started one in Gaza, would you believe, where they had a few dozen programmers before the October 7th events. It turns out that obviously October 7th has put a lot of a monkey wrench into this, but it's much more tragic than that. Eyal's daughter and son-in-law, future, they were engaged to be married, were 2 of the party kids who were at the Nova festival in the Gaza Strip. It turns out that what Hamas did is they not just attacked Israeli settlements and babies and women and families in their own homes, and not only a bunch of military people, mostly women, who were used to watch screens on the border, but they went after this festival of music and love, which was in the desert, and slaughtered about 400 people in cold blood, mostly kids in their teens and 20s. And that was Eyal's daughter and her fiance. And you would think that that's, I guess, game over for NVIDIA and Mellanox, but you think again, because Eyal is redoubling his efforts on coexistence. He talks about someday rebuilding in Gaza, but he's still operating the Ramallah facility. And he, like many others, understand that there is no way forward other than living together, making money, creating, building a future together. And that's exactly what we need to do.
Thank you. Good. Well, let's turn. George, do you want to have any comment or?
Well, I just think that it was the Jensen Huang, the head of NVIDIA, company with a $3.5 trillion valuation at various times, and really the heart of our AI economy. And thus a vital contributor to the amazing dominance of American companies in global market cap. We got 70% of global market cap, mostly Apple, Amazon, etc. And Jensen Huang acknowledges that before they bought Mellanox had a bigger footprint in the data centers of the world than NVIDIA did, and that it enabled NVIDIA to create the NVLink system that integrates these data centers into hyperscale computers that are the foundation of the AI boom. And I really disagree with Jonathan. I think the U.S. is more dependent on Israel than Israel is on the United States. I got just the lists of purchases of Israeli companies by Broadcom, Cisco, eBay, Intel, Marvell, and just Pfizer, Palantir, just everybody, all American companies that dominate our stock market have absolutely critical path contributions from Israel. And I think we're delusional if we think that we can really do without Israel. It's just not. It just fails to understand the realities of the world. Israel, with 0.02% of the world's population, generates fully a third or more of the major innovations that animate our high technologies that underlie global prosperity and enable this planet to support 8 billion people. It's and also the defense and cybersecurity, all this, we'd be disarmed without these contributions. I was an advocate of the Strategic Defense Initiative. I gave Ronald Reagan his first microchip and told him how it would enable his missile defense program to succeed. But the U.S. never fully really did it. And Israel, under fire, did it. So we have missile defense. We have Iron Beam about to be launched next year. We have this fabulous anti-missile capability at a time when the whole world is endangered by maniacal people in Iran or wherever that like to shoot missiles at nearby successful countries.
George, I think this is a good chance to introduce Jim's story of your companies and what happened to them when you tried to get them funded. You had something like 18 patents on different innovations of yours, inventions of yours and your team. And George tells a story that you couldn't get them funded in Silicon Valley, and you wound up over in Israel, right?
Yeah, yes, that's right. We have actually a lot more than 18 patents. We have well over 150 patents, and so we've been busy filing patents. I actually filed one disclosure a month on average for the last 25 years. So it's been kind of busy. But you would think that there'd be lines of Americans coming in, and I don't know what it is. I must not make a very good impression upon them. But they come in and analyze, and I get like 22-year-old analysts come in and start peppering me with questions that I feel like I'm being interrogated by a high schooler. And I guess it doesn't come across very well, but the Israelis have been very good to me. They approached me, and when I explain something to them and tell them, they just understand and they run with it. So it's been a much easier road. Plus, I am Jewish, and I have family that lives in Israel. My daughter's in Israel. I have grandchildren there, son-in-law there, and so I love that country. And there's something that happens that you want to support that land. And so when I work with people over there, it's something that drives me. And also, I don't want to forget the spiritual aspect of this. We can think about Israeli people and say, oh, they're so amazing, their schools must be so amazing. I don't think their schools are much different than our schools in the U.S. I've lectured at every one of the institutions in Israel, from the north to the south to the middle, multiple times. There's a spiritual aspect to this, and God came and he said, I have chosen a man. He says, I have chosen Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have given him the Spirit of God. I've filled him with the Spirit of God, and I've given him wisdom and knowledge and insight in all kinds of craftsmanship. And there was a spiritual dimension where a craftsman, a tradesman, was filled with God's Spirit, and he was given wisdom and he was given understanding before he was given knowledge. Wisdom and understanding came first, and then knowledge. And he could work, it says, in gold, in silver, and in bronze, in stone cutting and in stone setting. He could work in wood, in fabric, and in perfuming, and he had the ability to teach it. There's something that is given, and this comes from on high. The other thing that I think is different is if you look at how long it took the United States to make the first nuclear weapon, it was only about 18 months because we had a gun to our head, and it made all the difference in the world. You look at the same thing, the U-2 technology, the spy plane. You had to develop all of the titanium technology for that. Again, in about 18 months, you put the whole thing together in the 1950s. And that jet still flies. Different avionics, but the same jet still flies. So that jet is almost 70 years old. Same with the B-52. But the U-2 was built so fast. And then if you look at our most recent fighter jet, it took about 20 years. When you have a gun to your head, it changes the dynamic of the way people work. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. And the whole service in the military, it becomes like a community that rides with you. Even when you're done with the Army there, it rides with you, that community spirit of having worked together.
Jim, I think you should tell people what some of the inventions are that you have made, because a lot of them are medical, and they have medical implications, and we haven't talked a lot about medicine at this conference yet.
Yeah, we've done a few different things, excuse me, on the medical front with the Israelis. We had the first one we did was with graphene quantum dots, and I just have to say they took it much further than I ever really imagined. And then the next deal was with a type of memory, a ReRAM memory, that is working out very well. It's hard to get hardware qualified anywhere in the world, because if you can't put anything in a computer box without everybody who put something in that box to agree to this new technology, and again, they made advances in that I had never really even dreamed of. So this is Weebit, and they had taken it and moved it much further along than I had imagined. And the most recent one was where they took this. We did the flash joule heating with them. They started the company here in the U.S. and in Canada rather than in Israel. That was the way that they had worked that out. But again, that was with my Israeli friends. And then the more recent one is the one that they again did, and they took it public in Australia, which you'll hear about tomorrow, which is taking waste. It is actually taking waste materials and upcycling them, not just recycling, but upcycling, and being able to take other people's trash and turn it into valuable material. So we've done a number of deals. Yeah, we did graphene, and now we're doing other metals, and I've come to know some of the investors there, and they've become friends. They've become like family, and so we've done several deals.
That's great. Gilad, you have a very innovative company, ASOX, and it's an Israeli company. And how's it doing in the middle of a war?
First of all, it's still a work in process, right? I think one of the things we're all thinking is linear. It's not certain that the worst part is behind us. And although the events that happened in Gaza and recently in Lebanon are a great effect on the mood, as you saw, it's not fundamental to the business operations. Let's talk a little bit about ASOX. One thing I didn't do here, I wasn't being Israeli. If you see, I was in a panel starting at, I think, 7:30, and I only got to speak about at the sunset clause. If I was a real Israeli, I would probably push myself in a little bit earlier. And that one of the reasons, and Bob knows it, is that my family comes from New England, from the state of Maine. And they made the move to Israel in the early 60s. But going back to what you asked, an Israeli company is an interesting animal. Let's just talk about ASOX for a few minutes for the sake of variety. So ASOX is about 100 people. 40 of them work in Israel. Another 20 work in Cyprus, and they come from India. If you ask me, what are the Indian employees working in an Israeli company doing in Cyprus is, we had a big R&D in Bangalore, but by the time I could remember their names, they used to walk away to another company for 100 rupees. But turns out if you move them to Cyprus and you give them a good place to stay, they stay with you. So we've got employees in Cyprus. Then we've got another 25 people in Lviv in the Ukraine. Now, that's another interesting data point, because until a year ago, I used to have to explain to investors, don't worry about the organization in the Ukraine, because we back them up through our team in Israel. And guess what? Now I'm saying, don't worry about the team in Israel. I've got them backed up in this safe place, Ukraine, in Lviv. So talk about risk assessment in a small company. And then I've got employees in Japan, South Korea, and England who are front and center of what we do. So it's very challenging to be an Israeli company. But actually, frankly, I came here to talk a little bit about what we're doing in tech, because I appreciate all the concern and the feedbacks about Israeli companies. But I've learned one thing living in Israel for 52 years. I don't worry about things I can't control. And because I don't control the war in Gaza and Lebanon or the equipment in Iran, I can't be bothered with it. I have to run a business. So the fundamentals of business at the end of the day have to do with how do you execute? And nobody's going to give you a dime more in valuation because you're from Israel. So what we're doing is, and give me 5 minutes, I'll explain it very intuitively. For the guys who saw me a couple of years ago, we came from communications. And we spent a hell of a lot of time building up software-defined radio infrastructure for telecom, as you described. But what you wrote here is simply obsolete. In the last couple of years, we have been focused on private networks for industry. And the reason that you need these private networks is because robots don't call their mothers, and they don't download YouTube videos. They need solid communication to upstream their information and to get control data downstream to robots. And for that reason, you need to build. It is built on 5G, but it's a very special section of 5G of mission-critical communications. And if you're bored a little bit, it's not by accident, because we actually call that part of our business sleepy, boring software. That's the thing that just needs to work once. Sleepy, boring software. John, if you want to really make a killing, invest in SaaS companies who develop sleepy, boring software. Because the interesting software you saw today, there was the guy from Moderna. He showed you every 3 months that top list changes. But sleepy, boring, I have a customer now in Japan in the train industry that told me, look, I'll do business with you, but you got to promise me not to touch the code for the next 20 years. So basically what he's telling me is, I'll pay you for the next 20 years, provided you do nothing. That's an investment. You don't have to, you didn't talk with me before. I'm just getting started. I'm just getting
don't go too
So
much
let's
farther.
talk about AI for a minute. That is the first fundamental product. The real interesting, I think, for this crowd is what we're doing in AI. And guess what? We're not using language models. You know why? Robots don't talk. Actually, when you speak to them, they have to employ a translator. The language in which robots operate is not language. Therefore, we don't need to worry about ChatGPT and language models. We built our own proprietary deep neural networks, and we use the information coming from robots and other applications in the production floor, and we use them to build generative physical AI. That means instead of modeling language, which is very interesting, but kind of repetitive and frankly boring, we are simulating the universe, the materials, and materials are being sampled through radio signals. So think about the application. Okay, I'm doing it right now for myself in order to track and to tell you where robots are. But think about one application, and this is how I'm going to tie it up with innovation coming from Israel that matters to you, people who don't operate robots. Because I'm assuming most of you don't operate robots. But what you all are doing is you're relying on GPS for fundamental businesses. In your airports, in your seaports. And get what? GPS, which was the acronym for reliability, is the least reliable technology right now on the planet. In Israel, in the Ukraine, in Taiwan, in South Korea, the first thing to go today is GPS. So anybody who's got a business relying on knowing his location through GPS is FXXX. What we do is we can now use the same technology that we built to module these industrial shop floors. We can also module an airport or a seaport or a city and give you a fair estimate of where you are, not by measuring triangulations of satellites and not even measuring triangulations of towers like the British did to detect spies 70 years ago. But we're doing it through AI because we know the pattern. We learn the pattern of this behavior, we measure it, and now we have an AI model for the world. And I think that's an exciting thing. So moving from a small 80, 100-man team in Israel who developed a very targeted application in industry, and now we can contribute to the, let's call it Western civilization, although it's not necessarily in the West, with these new technologies that can pretty much save us all from very bad actors. And that's kind of the statement I'm doing. And as I said, I am Israeli. I'm going to give myself another 2 minutes because otherwise nobody's going to give me that opportunity.
Actually, I'm going to stop you now
All right.
because what we need to have is some questions from the audience. If you
A
do have,
question from the audience
if you
is
have, and you can
But
weigh
only
in
if
on
they're
that.
not boring.
Okay.
Knowing,
Unfair, Andrew.
I'll tell you what, knowing I would be barred, I just did it for the fun. I just did it for spite.
Yeah.
But really what in terms of these 2 minutes, I want to say, and I think kind of not being contrarian to John, I'm more worried about Israeli tech because the data, John, that you showed can go both ways. What I saw in your data is over-concentration in cybersecurity and over-concentration in a small group of companies like Wiz. But the Israeli startup community, cybersecurity is reaching a peak. In some respect, I'm thinking it's starting to reach a decline. The amount of new technology you can absorb in cybersecurity is diminishing. The head of the fund that did a lot of these cyber deals is now being questioned because he gives stock options to the CIOs who are buying these cyber companies before they get acquired. And for Israel to be fundamental, we actually liked those smaller dispersed rounds in multi-areas. The concentration in cyber and those mega rounds you showed, they're not good. They're actually pretty bad.
If I could just interject here, I think it's a very important point. Israel actually, when you look at it, is so diverse in terms of its technology footprint. Gilad's right that the data at the moment shows a momentary blip, I think, in cyber over-concentration. As I mentioned before, we've typically been about 20%. We went to 50%. Not a bad thing given how important cyber is now, but long-term, we have an incredible range of technologies in the country. So you were mentioning, Bruce, medical. 7 of the 35 last blockbuster drugs were developed based on pharma insights coming out of Israeli universities. Whether it's focused ultrasound, blow away, tumors or literally cross the blood-brain barrier, whether it's, telemedicine, innovations or exoskeletons or you name it, okay? Israel is a medical rock star, and that's no question. In terms of ag tech, there is no better place because ag tech today is bio mixed with growing expertise. And while we're a little bit land poor in terms of not having vast hinterland, as it were, we've got incredible agricultural developments. In fact, we're the second largest investor in alternate protein. We're, by the way, at OurCrowd, massive food tech investors. And you'll see a lot of important things there. You look at space, you look at quantum, you look at the cloud, you look at energy, okay? We've got energy storage companies and hydrogen companies and you name it coming out of Israel. You look at fintech, okay, in terms of keeping our banking system stable. It really is almost impossible. Electro-optics, okay, my father's memory here. I mean, you look at all these machines that are keeping, the big, you were talking about AML today. Yeah. Okay, look, these big machines have to be kept honest. So Orbotech and all of the QA for the semiconductor industry. Yeah, and it just goes on and on. So I think that the point you're making is a good one. It's not just the story of Israel and cyber, or Israel and defense, or Israel and AI, but there aren't really better suits at the moment to have the strength in. The issue is that Israel has a lot more, and love to, we had time allowing, share more of that stuff.
I keep hearing new inventions from Israel, and it's particularly in the medical field. Let's have this one question.
Sir, Jonathan, you're obviously constrained by land, by the number of people, by resources, but you mentioned a relationship forming with Korea. Are we to interpret that Korea may be a scalable output to increase manufacturing of Israeli technology and Israeli goods for a global market? Are you able to reach out and build for the world through Korea?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think that we have been captive for too long to a notion that innovation comes from a very small geographic area, you know, about a mile wide, up and down, you know, Sand Hill Road and around Stanford University, and a little bit my old alma mater, Berkeley. Okay, but you know, it used to be this famous statement that Mike Moritz said from Sequoia. He said, "If I could not ride my bike to the investment, I wouldn't make it." Okay, what kind of, you know, I like Mike. Mike's a great guy, a great investor, but that was the reality. And you saw in the early days of Israeli technology, the investors would come, and this is, you know, I go back in Israeli tech to the days when there was no venture capital. My first investment and first company experience was with my dad building a defense contractor, building fiber optic communications for high resolution video, a company called Merit, which we sold to an oil company, Amoco. And there wasn't a single venture capital fund in the country when I had to raise money. I had to raise money, don't even ask. Okay, but we did, and we were successful.
What year was that?
We sold the company in 1990.
1990.
About
so
10 years too early.
So this was before the,
My father was a
before
early.
Startup Nation.
Yes, it was very early, and you know the beauty is that I think that the next big innovations are going to come from a lot of different places that are going to
But John,
surprise you.
if I could add, we're a small company. We've got 3 countries in which we operate: Japan, South Korea, and Germany. By the way, we shut down our U.S. office because the U.S. is about we analyzed the U.S. is in industrial innovation about 5 years late behind Asia, so we'll come to America in 28-9 because you guys are a little bit behind. But South Korea, it's a mistake to look at South Korea as a manufacturing hub for Israeli tech.
No, that's
Actually,
I will.
Give me a minute.
I
You're
will.
busy?
I will.
Give me a minute.
I just have to finish.
Give me a chance.
I have to finish this point because
All right,
I
if
did
you
not.
have to,
I did not
then you
want.
do it after I finish. So, in South Korea, about 35% guys of industrial automation robots are being manufactured and consumed in South Korea. 35%. And the South Korea innovation in areas of AI and industrial is staggering. I'm not talking about cosmetics and K-pop, which you guys, if you don't know, that they're leaders. So this partnership with Korea is actually, it sounds strange, it's a partnership of two countries roughly at the same technology footprint. Fast innovators, if you don't innovate, you're going to get killed. Very, very similar in culture. Decision maker CEOs take huge risks. So the cultures are actually very, very similar. And the partnership is a partnership of equals, not of innovators and manufacturers.
No,
that's what makes it exciting.
The point I was going to make is that our fund with Korea is not investing in Israeli startups manufacturing in Korea. It is to put half of the money into Korean startups, half the money into Israeli startups, and put the entrepreneurs from both countries to work together. Now, the reality is that there are big differences between Koreans and Israelis. Okay, Israelis, a long-term plan is next week. Okay, in other words, we are not a good planning country in general. I think that, you know, you look at our budgeting process and whatnot. Korea plans, okay? And therefore, people in the world have different skill sets. And when you put together entrepreneurs or people from different parts of the world, I think that's when you get explosive results. That's why Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley, because you've attracted so many incredible people from around the world. And I think that having that kind of blend is what's interesting.
George, final thoughts?
Well, I think it's Israel is absolutely pivotal to the world, and it's exciting to visit, and it's exciting to invest there. It's full of opportunity, believe it or not, and trading, and the idea that all the kind of innovation that happens in Israel could just be kind of shifted to the United States if we have a high enough tariff wall or severe enough penalties for foreign investment is just one of those delusions. The people have particular genius and particular capabilities, and you have to chase all around the world for this tiny minority that sustains the world's prosperity. And I think I like an amazing prophetic statement by Theodore Herzl way back long before Israel was founded. And he said, the world will be freed by our liberty, it'll be enriched by our wealth, and it'll be magnified by our greatness, and our achievements will redound to the benefit of all mankind. And I think Israel has achieved this goal after almost going broke in 1985 and having to, with 1,000% inflation and the total failure of their socialist experiment. And this is another reason people don't like Israel, is they proved socialism didn't work, and they proved that emancipation of an economy can achieve just incredible effects. And that really is the Israel test and Israel lesson.
However, you can read more about it in the Israel test that will be on sale tomorrow. And thank you all. Thank the panel, please. And have a good evening.